The rain hammered against the metal roof of Marcus Chen's farmhouse like bullets from heaven. He pulled his worn jacket tighter as he stepped onto the porch, surveying the damage from last night's storm. Broken fence posts jutted from the mud like broken teeth, and his prized tomato plants lay scattered across the flooded field. 20 years of farming on the frontier colony of New Eden, and he'd never seen weather this violent. Marcus grabbed his toolbox and trudged through the ankle-deep water toward the damaged fence line. The storm had torn through the settlement like an angry god, leaving destruction in its wake. Most of his neighbors had already given up and moved to the safer inner colonies, but Marcus was stubborn. This land was his home, even if it was at the edge of human space where strange things happened and stranger creatures roamed. As he approached the far corner of his property, something caught his eye. A dark shape huddled beneath the twisted remains of an old oak tree. At first he thought it might be debris from the storm, but then it moved. Marcus set down his tools and approached carefully. Living this far out, you learn to be cautious of unknown creatures. The thing was unlike anything he'd ever seen in 20 years on New Eden. It was roughly the size of a large house cat, but its proportions were all wrong. Its limbs were too long, its head too angular, and its fur shimmered with an iridescent quality that seemed to shift colors in the dim light. Most striking were its eyes, large golden orbs that held an intelligence that made Marcus's skin crawl. The creature was clearly dying. Its breathing was shallow and labored, and a dark fluid that might have been blood pooled beneath its emaciated body. Its ribs showed clearly through its matted fur, and its golden eyes had the glassy look of impending death. Marcus had seen enough sick animals to recognize the signs. He should have walked away. Every instinct told him this was dangerous, that this creature didn't belong on New Eden or anywhere else in human space. But something about those intelligent eyes stopped him. There was a desperation there, a plea for help that transcended species barriers. Marcus knelt beside the creature, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Easy there, little guy," he murmured, though he doubted it could understand human speech. "You're in pretty rough shape, aren't you?" The creature's eyes tracked his movements, and Marcus could swear he saw recognition there. It tried to lift its head but lacked the strength. A soft sound escaped its throat, something between a purr and a whimper that tugged at Marcus's heart. Against his better judgment, Marcus reached out slowly. The creature didn't flinch as his calloused fingers touched its fur. The texture was like nothing he'd ever felt, softer than silk but with an almost electric quality that made his fingertips tingle. The creature was ice-cold and trembling. "You're hypothermic," Marcus said, though he wasn't sure if the same rules applied to alien physiology, and starving by the looks of it. He glanced back at his farmhouse, then at the dying creature. Every rational part of his mind screamed warnings. This could be carrying alien diseases. It could be dangerous. It could be someone's illegal experiment or escaped laboratory subject. Getting involved could bring unwanted attention from the colonial authority. But Marcus had never been good at listening to the rational part of his mind. It's what had driven him to farm on the frontier in the first place, what had kept him here when others fled. He carefully scooped the creature into his arms, surprised by how light it was. The poor thing barely weighed more than a newborn calf. The creature made that soft sound again as Marcus carried it toward his house. Its large eyes never left his face, and Marcus had the unsettling feeling that it was studying him, memorizing every detail. Inside his kitchen, Marcus laid the creature on a pile of old blankets near the wood stove. He cranked up the heat and fetched his veterinary supplies. Living this far from civilization, you learn to doctor your own animals. The creature's vital signs were weak but stable. Its body temperature was dangerously low, and it was severely dehydrated. Marcus set up an IV line with practiced ease, grateful for his years of experience with sick livestock. The creature tolerated the procedure with remarkable calm, as if it understood he was trying to help. The real question was what to feed it. Marcus had no idea what an alien creature might eat, or if human food would even be compatible with its biology. He started with small amounts of warm broth, using a syringe to carefully drip the liquid into the creature's mouth. To his relief, it swallowed readily. Its eyes seemed to brighten slightly, and some of the tension left its small body. Marcus continued the feeding process, alternating between broth and small amounts of milk. The creature accepted everything he offered, watching him with those unsettling, intelligent eyes. As the hours passed, Marcus found himself talking to the creature. It seemed to listen, its head tilting at the sound of his voice. When he paused in his monologue, it would make soft chirping sounds that almost sounded like responses. "You're not from around here, are you?" Marcus said as he checked the IV line. "Hell, I don't think you're from anywhere in human space. So how did you end up in my backyard during the worst storm in 20 years? The creature blinked slowly, and Marcus could swear he saw something like understanding in those golden eyes, as if it was asking itself the same question. Night fell as Marcus continued his vigil. The creature's breathing had stabilized and some color had returned to its gums. It was still desperately weak, but no longer seemed to be actively dying. Marcus dozed in his chair beside the stove, waking periodically to check on his patient. It was near midnight when the creature first showed signs of real improvement. Its eyes tracked Marcus's movements more alertly, and it attempted to lift its head. When Marcus offered more broth, it managed to lap at the liquid on its own. "That's it," Marcus encouraged, scratching gently behind what he assumed were the creature's ears. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" The creature leaned into his touch, producing a sound that was definitely a purr, though unlike any cat he'd ever heard. The vibration seemed to resonate through his fingers, leaving a strange tingling sensation. Marcus settled back in his chair, watching the steady rise and fall of the creature's breathing. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving only the gentle drip of water from the eaves. He had no idea what he'd gotten himself into, but one thing was certain. His quiet life on the frontier was about to become a lot more complicated. Marcus woke to the smell of burning wood and something else, something strange and metallic that made his nose twitch. The fire in the stove had died down to glowing embers, but the kitchen felt warm, almost hot. He rubbed his eyes and looked toward the pile of blankets where he'd left the alien creature. The blankets were empty. Panic shot through him as he bolted upright, scanning the kitchen. Had the creature died during the night? Had something taken it? Then he heard a soft chirping sound from the corner near his pantry. The creature was standing on unsteady legs, nosing at a bag of grain that had somehow fallen from a high shelf. In the 12 hours since Marcus had found it, the change was remarkable. Its fur had regained some of its lustrous quality, shifting from deep purple to electric blue in the morning light streaming through the window. Its golden eyes were bright and alert, tracking Marcus's every movement. "Well, look who's feeling better," Marcus said softly, not wanting to startle it. "But how did you get that grain down?" "It was 6 feet up." The creature looked at him, then at the grain bag, then back at him. It made a series of chirping sounds that almost sounded like speech, though in no language Marcus had ever heard. The sounds had a musical quality, rising and falling in patterns that seemed too complex to be random. Marcus approached slowly, and the creature didn't retreat. If anything, it seemed pleased to see him, producing that strange purring vibration that made his skin tingle. He knelt beside it and was shocked to see that the grain bag had been opened with surgical precision. The edges were perfectly straight, as if cut with a laser. "How did you do that?" Marcus whispered, examining the bag. There were no claw marks, no tears, just a clean line across the top. The creature chirped again and nudged the bag toward him with its nose. Marcus poured some grain into his palm and offered it to the creature. It sniffed delicately, then began eating with obvious relish. Its tongue was unlike anything he'd seen, blue-black and covered with tiny, flexible projections that seemed to move independently. As the creature ate, Marcus noticed other changes. Its body seemed more substantial, less skeletal. The dark fluid that had pooled beneath it yesterday was gone, though he was sure he hadn't cleaned it up. Most unsettling of all, its golden eyes seemed to be watching everything, cataloging details with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. After the creature finished eating, it began exploring the kitchen with growing confidence. Its movements were graceful, almost fluid, and Marcus noticed it avoided stepping on anything that might make noise. It investigated every corner, every cabinet, every appliance with the systematic thoroughness of a scientist conducting research. When it reached Marcus's tablet computer charging on the counter, something extraordinary happened. The creature touched the screen with one delicate paw and the device activated. The lock screen showed Marcus's password prompt, 9 digits he'd never told anyone. The creature studied the screen for a moment, then began tapping the numbers with surgical precision. The tablet unlocked. Marcus's blood ran cold. "That's impossible," he breathed. "There's no way you could know my password. It's my mother's birthday and she died before you were even born. Assuming you were born and didn't just appear. The creature looked at him with those unsettling eyes, then back at the tablet. It began tapping the screen, navigating through menus with the skill of someone who'd used the device for years. Within moments, it had accessed the settlement's communication network and was scrolling through files Marcus didn't even know existed. "Stop," Marcus said firmly, reaching for the tablet. "You can't just—" The creature looked at him and made a sound, not chirping this time, but something deeper, more complex. The sound seemed to bypass his ears entirely, resonating directly in his mind. Suddenly, Marcus understood with perfect clarity what the creature was trying to communicate. Need to know. Need to understand. Danger coming. The words weren't spoken, but they appeared in Marcus's consciousness with the force of absolute truth. He staggered back, clutching his head. "What the hell are you?" The creature continued working on the tablet, its movements becoming more urgent. Images flashed across the screen. Star charts, shipping manifests, communication logs. Marcus caught glimpses of names and dates, but everything moved too fast to follow. Then the creature stopped. It looked at Marcus with an expression that somehow conveyed both sadness and determination. Again, that strange resonance in his mind. Too late. They come soon. "You saved me. Now I save you. Who's coming?" Marcus demanded. "What are you talking about?" But the creature had already moved away from the tablet, padding toward the window that faced the main road to the settlement. It stood on its hind legs, pressing its paws against the glass as it stared into the distance. The fur along its spine began to rise, and a low humming sound emerged from its throat. Marcus looked at the tablet screen. It now displayed a real-time view of the settlement's early warning system, a network of sensors that monitored space traffic around New Eden. Red dots were approaching the planet's outer atmosphere. "Dozens of them, ships," Marcus whispered. "But the next supply run isn't due for 3 months. The creature turned from the window and approached him. This time when it touched his mind, the communication was more complex, filled with images and concepts that made his head spin. He saw vast ships that moved like living things through space. He saw worlds stripped bare of life, their surfaces cracked and bleeding. He saw creatures like the one before him, but different, larger, more aggressive, with the same iridescent fur but cold, predatory eyes. And threading through it all was a message of terrible urgency. The creatures in the approaching ships weren't explorers or traders. They were hunters, and they had followed a trail that led directly to New Eden. A trail that had somehow been broken by Marcus's simple act of kindness to a dying creature in his field. "They hunt my kind. Kill worlds to find us. But I am different now. You changed something, made it possible to fight back." Marcus sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the impossible situation. 24 hours ago, his biggest problem had been storm damage to his fence. Now he was apparently caught in the middle of an interstellar conflict he didn't understand. "Why me?" he asked aloud. "I'm just a farmer. I don't know anything about space battles or alien politics." The creature approached him, reaching up to place one paw on his knee. The touch sent a warm sensation through his body, and suddenly his mind was filled with images of his own actions over the past day. But they weren't seen through his eyes. They were seen through the creature's. He saw himself approaching the dying alien with caution but no fear. Saw his hands moving with practiced competence as he administered first aid. Saw the genuine concern in his expression as he worked to save a life he didn't even understand. Most importantly, he saw something in his own face that he'd never noticed. A fundamental decency. A refusal to let anything suffer if he could prevent it. This is why. This is what they fear. What makes humans dangerous to them? "What makes us dangerous?" Marcus asked. "We can barely survive on one planet, let alone fight an interstellar war." The creature's purr grew stronger, and Marcus felt its response resonate through his bones. "You care. Even for things you do not understand. Even when it costs you. They cannot comprehend this. Cannot predict it. Cannot defend against it." Through the window, Marcus could see the first signs of panic in the settlement below. Lights were coming on in houses as emergency broadcasts began. The approaching ships would be visible soon, and then the real terror would begin. The creature stepped away from him and began to change. Its form seemed to shift and flow, growing larger, more substantial. The iridescent fur began to glow with an inner light, and its golden eyes blazed like stars. When it spoke again, its voice was no longer just in Marcus's mind. It filled the room like music made of light. They come to finish what they started. But they do not know what you have created, what your kindness has awakened. The emergency sirens began wailing across New Eden settlement, just as the creature finished its transformation. Marcus stared in shock at what the small, dying alien had become. It now stood nearly 4 feet tall, its body elegant and powerful, covered in fur that rippled with patterns of light like aurora dancing across a night sky. Its golden eyes had multiplied, becoming a complex array of sensory organs that seemed to see far beyond the visible spectrum. "What are you?" Marcus whispered, though part of him was beginning to understand that he'd asked the wrong question from the beginning. "I am what my people call a seer. We perceive the flow of time, the currents of possibility that shape the future. My kind are born rarely, and when we appear, the devourer fleet hunts us without mercy." The creature's voice had evolved too, becoming something that existed simultaneously in sound and thought. Marcus could hear it with his ears, but he also felt the meaning settling directly into his consciousness, like stones dropped into still water. Through the windows, Marcus could see people emerging from their houses, pointing at the sky where dark shapes were becoming visible against the stars. The approaching ships were massive, their hulls reflecting no light, as if they absorbed illumination rather than deflecting it. "Why do they hunt you?" Marcus asked, though he was moving even as he spoke, instinctively gathering supplies. 20 years on the frontier had taught him to prepare for the worst, because we see what they truly are. What they will become if left unchecked. The devourers consume worlds not for resources, but for the life force itself. They feed on the terror and despair of dying civilizations. My visions showed them a future where their hunger would eventually consume the galaxy itself. Marcus paused in his gathering, a can of emergency rations halfway to his pack. "The entire galaxy? Every star, every world, every thinking being reduced to fuel for their endless appetite. They cannot allow seers to live because we can show others this future. We can rally resistance. We can change the pattern of what is to come." The first explosions lit up the night sky as the devourer ships reached the planet's atmosphere. Marcus saw flashes of energy weapons striking the settlement's modest defensive grid. The shields that protected New Eden from space debris and minor threats crumpled like paper before weapons designed to crack planets. "We need to evacuate," Marcus said, reaching for his communication device. "Warn the others, get them to the emergency shelters. It will not matter." The shelters were designed for natural disasters, not this. The devourers will strip this world bare in hours, consuming every living thing down to the bacteria in the soil. Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. Then we're all dead. The seer approached him, its transformed features somehow managing to convey both ancient sadness and newfound hope. "Not all. Your species has something mine lost long ago, something the devourers have never encountered, which is the willingness to sacrifice for strangers. To fight against impossible odds, not for victory, but because it is right. My people became too wise, too careful. We saw our own destruction in every possible future and chose inaction over hope. But humans choose hope even when logic demands despair." Through the walls of the farmhouse, Marcus could hear the sound of approaching engines. Not the high whine of devourer ships, but the familiar rumble of human vehicles. His neighbors were fleeing toward his farm, knowing his position on high ground offered the best defensive position in the area. "What do you need me to do?" Marcus asked, surprised by his own calmness. Perhaps it was the seer's presence, or perhaps it was simply the farmer's practicality that faced each crisis as it came. "Trust me. Let me show you what I have seen." The seer pressed one transformed paw against Marcus's forehead, and suddenly his consciousness exploded outward. He saw the battle that was about to unfold, not just here on New Eden, but across a dozen human colonies. He witnessed the devourer fleet's systematic approach to consumption, the way they used fear as a weapon before their ships ever arrived, but threaded through the visions of destruction were other images. Humans refusing to abandon their wounded, soldiers throwing themselves on energy grenades to save civilians they'd never met, farmers like Marcus making impossible choices because someone had to try. And in those moments of sacrifice, something changed in the flow of time itself. The seer's ability to perceive future possibilities showed that each act of human courage created new pathways, new potential outcomes that hadn't existed before. "This is what I could not see until you saved me. Your kindness was not random chance. It was the first note of a symphony that could reshape the fate of the galaxy." Marcus's vision snapped back to the present as vehicles roared into his yard. Through the window, he could see trucks and farm equipment loaded with families. His neighbor Sarah Chen was directing people toward his reinforced storm cellar, while old Henrik Johansson was setting up his hunting rifles on improvised firing positions. "They don't know what they're up against," Marcus said. "They know enough. They know their neighbors need protection. That is sufficient." The first Devourer ground forces descended from the sky like metallic rain. The creatures that emerged from the drop pods were insectoid nightmares, their chitinous shells gleaming with the same light-absorbing quality as their ships. They moved with hive-mind precision, flowing across the landscape toward the concentrations of human life force they sensed. Marcus grabbed his shotgun and extra ammunition, but the seer stopped him with a gentle touch. "That will not be enough, but this will." The seer began to glow, its fur patterns shifting into complex geometries that hurt to look at directly. The light spread from its body, flowing across the farmhouse walls, seeping into the ground beneath their feet. "I am going to show them something they have never seen before. A future where their hunger leads not to satiation, but to starvation. Where every world they consume makes them weaker, not stronger. How is that possible? Because you have given me something new to work with. Every human who chooses courage over survival, who risks their life for a stranger, creates a resonance in the life force itself. The Devourers feed on despair and fear, but hope and sacrifice taste like poison to them." Outside, the first exchange of gunfire erupted as Henrik's hunting party engaged the advancing Devourer scouts. The human weapons were pitifully inadequate against the aliens' armor, but Marcus watched in amazement as the Devourers stumbled, confused by the humans' tactical choices. Where they expected fear-based retreat, they found coordinated resistance. Where they expected every individual to preserve themselves at others' expense, they found people deliberately exposing themselves to cover their neighbors' withdrawal. They cannot adapt to patterns they cannot understand. Their entire existence is based on the premise that all life follows the same basic drives for survival. They have never encountered a species that willingly chooses death over dishonor. The seer's glow intensified, and Marcus felt something fundamental shift in the air around them. The quality of light changed, as if reality itself was being rewritten. Through his windows, he could see the Devourer creatures beginning to move erratically, their perfect formation breaking down as their shared consciousness struggled to process incompatible data. "Now they will see what I see, what you made possible. The future where their hunger turns against them." A scream split the night air, but it didn't come from any human throat. The Devourer creatures were falling to their knees, clutching their heads as visions of their own ultimate fate flooded their minds. In the sky above, their ships began to waver, their dark hulls flickering with uncertainty. Marcus watched in stunned silence as his neighbors, still firing their inadequate weapons, began to push back against creatures that should have been unstoppable. The Devourers' coordination was shattered, their certainty replaced by something they had never experienced before. Fear of a future they could not control. This is just the beginning. The pattern spreads now, carried by quantum entanglement to every Devourer ship, every conquered world. Your choice to save one dying creature has become a plague that will consume the consumers themselves. The change rippled outward from Marcus's farmhouse like a stone thrown into a cosmic pond. Across the settlement, the Devourer creatures that had been advancing with mechanical precision began to falter. Their shared consciousness, evolved over millions of years to coordinate perfect destruction, now carried something new and terrifying: uncertainty about their own fate. Marcus watched through his window as Sarah Chen led a group of children toward the storm cellar, completely exposed to Devourer fire. Any rational military force would have cut them down instantly. Instead, the alien creatures stood frozen, their weapons lowered as visions of an impossible future played out in their collective mind. "They see themselves starving," the seer explained, its transformed body now radiating light that seemed to bend space around them. "In every timeline where they destroy this world, they grow weaker. The life force they consume becomes tainted with something they cannot digest, the essence of willing sacrifice." "But that's not possible," Marcus said, though even as he spoke, he could see the evidence of the impossible unfolding before him. Energy is energy. Life force is life force, not when it is freely given rather than taken by force. Your species has discovered something my people theorized but never proved. The quantum structure of consciousness itself can be altered by the intent behind actions. When humans choose to die for others, they create a pattern in the life force that becomes toxic to beings who feed on suffering. A devourer scout ship, sleek and predatory, descended toward the farmhouse. Its weapons powered up, energy readings that should have reduced the building to ash. Instead, the ship hovered uncertainly, its alien pilot overwhelmed by visions of a galaxy where every act of consumption weakened, rather than strengthened their kind. Marcus stepped onto his porch, shotgun in hand, though he knew it was useless against the ship's armored hull. But as he raised the weapon, not in hope of victory but simply because someone had to try, the seer's light pulsed brighter. The scout ship's weapons powered down. Then, in a movement that defied everything known about devourer psychology, it began to retreat. "They taste the future through their connection to you," the seer said. "Every moment of courage, every choice to stand against the darkness feeds back through their collective consciousness. They are learning what it means to be afraid." Across New Eden, the tide of battle began to shift in ways that made no tactical sense. Human defenders outnumbered 1,000 to 1 and armed with weapons barely adequate for hunting local wildlife, found themselves gaining ground against one of the galaxy's most feared military forces. But it wasn't the weapons that were winning the fight. It was the way Marcus's neighbor Thompson threw himself between a devourer squad and a wounded woman he'd never met. The way teenager Amy Zhao used herself as bait to lead creatures away from the school shelter. The way old Henrik kept firing his hunting rifle even after losing his left arm, buying precious seconds for others to escape. Each act of heroism created ripples in the quantum foam of space-time itself, and those ripples carried the seer's vision to every devourer ship in the fleet. They began to understand, for the first time in their species' existence, what it meant to face an enemy that could not be broken because they refused to value their own lives above others. "Your military commanders will never understand what happened here," the seer observed as devourer ships began withdrawing from the planet's atmosphere. "They will try to replicate human tactics, human weapons, human technology, but the real weapon cannot be copied. The willingness to die for strangers," Marcus said, beginning to understand. "More than that, the willingness to hope when hope is irrational, to fight when fighting is futile, to care about the future even when you will not live to see it. These are not tactics that can be taught or strategies that can be learned. They are fundamental aspects of human consciousness." The communications array in Marcus's house crackled to life as reports flooded in from across human space. The Devourer fleet, which had been systematically destroying colonies for months, was withdrawing from every front simultaneously. Military analysts were scrambling to understand what had caused the sudden retreat, but Marcus was receiving other reports, transmitted directly through the seer's expanded consciousness. On worlds that had already fallen to the devourers, the occupying forces were beginning to sicken. The life force they had consumed from tortured populations was turning septic in their systems, poisoned by the memory of human resistance they had witnessed through their quantum connection. "This is how empires fall," the seer said. "Not through superior firepower or brilliant strategy, but when they encounter something that challenges their fundamental understanding of reality." The Devourers built their entire civilization on the assumption that all beings ultimately act from self-interest. Humans have proven that assumption wrong. A new sound filled the air, not the whine of Devourer engines, but the deeper rumble of human ships arriving in system. The Colonial Defense Force, summoned by the emergency broadcasts, had arrived expecting to find a dead world. Instead, they found a planet full of survivors and an enemy in full retreat. Marcus walked out into his field, where the morning sun was beginning to rise over a landscape transformed. The storm damage from 2 days ago seemed trivial now, compared to the scorch marks from energy weapons and the debris from crashed Devourer vehicles. But his neighbors were alive, standing in small groups and staring at the sky in amazement. The seer followed him, its transformed form now beginning to fade back toward its original size. The crisis had passed, but Marcus could sense that something fundamental had changed in the galaxy itself. "The pattern is established now," the seer explained. "Every time the Devourers encounter human resistance, the feedback will grow stronger. Their own psychic network, which was their greatest strength, has become their greatest weakness." "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "Do they just give up and go home?" "They cannot. Their entire biology depends on consuming life force. but they also cannot continue as they have. The toxicity will spread through their population until they are forced to evolve or die. Sarah Chen approached them, her clothes torn and her face streaked with ash, but alive and victorious. "Marcus," she called out, "whatever you did in that farmhouse, it saved us all. The whole planet is reporting the same thing. The aliens just stopped fighting and ran." Marcus looked at the small creature beside him, now once again resembling the dying animal he had found in his field. "I didn't do anything special. I just couldn't let something suffer if I could help it. And that," the seer said privately, "is what will reshape the galaxy." Above them, the first human reinforcement ships were entering orbit, their captains broadcasting requests for situation reports. Marcus knew that what had happened on New Eden would be studied, analyzed, and debated for generations. Military strategists would try to weaponize human compassion. Politicians would claim credit for a victory they didn't understand. But the truth was simpler and more profound than any of them would realize. A farmer had seen a creature in need and chosen to help, even when it might have been dangerous. That single act of kindness had unlocked a power that no weapon could match, and no armor could defend against: the power to make your enemies question everything they thought. They knew about the nature of existence itself. 3 weeks after the Battle of New Eden, as historians were already calling it, Marcus found himself in the most uncomfortable place he could imagine: a military briefing room aboard the flagship of the Colonial Defense Force. Admiral Chen Okafor, a stern woman with steel-gray hair and calculating eyes, sat across from him at a polished metal table. Behind her stood representatives from Scientific Command, Intelligence Division, and at least 3 agencies Marcus didn't recognize. The seer, now back in its original small form, sat calmly in a specially designed containment field that looked more like a luxury pet carrier than a prison. Its golden eyes tracked every movement in the room with the same unsettling intelligence Marcus had first noticed. "Mr. Chen," the Admiral began, consulting a tablet thick with classified data, "your actions on New Eden have created significant complications for our understanding of the current conflict." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I just helped a hurt animal. I didn't know it would start an interstellar incident." "An incident?" Admiral Chen Okafor's eyebrows rose. "Mr. Chen, Devourer forces have withdrawn from 17 human colonies in the past 3 weeks. Their expansion, which has been relentless for over a century, has not just stopped. It's reversed. We need to understand what happened." Dr. Yamamoto from Scientific Command leaned forward eagerly. "The quantum resonance readings from your farm are unlike anything in our databases. The creature you rescued appears to have created a localized distortion in space-time itself. We need to study how this was accomplished. They want to weaponize what happened." The seer spoke directly into Marcus's mind. "They believe they can replicate the effect through technology, rather than understanding." Marcus looked at the assembled officials. All of them focused on the seer with the intensity of scientists examining a new discovery. "What do you want to do with it?" "First, we need to understand its capabilities," said Colonel Morrison from Intelligence. "If this creature can influence devourer behavior through some form of psychic manipulation, that represents a significant strategic advantage. We need to know the range, duration, and replicability of the effect, and then," Marcus asked, though he could already guess the answer, "then we develop countermeasures for when the devourers adapt," Admiral Chen Okafor said pragmatically. "No weapon remains effective forever. If they can overcome whatever this creature did to them, we need to be prepared." Marcus felt a familiar surge of the protective instinct that had driven him to save the seer in the first place. "It's not a weapon. It's a living being that was dying, and I helped it. What happened after that wasn't planned or calculated." Dr. Yamamoto made notes on his tablet. "But surely you understand the implications. If we can understand the mechanism behind this effect, we could potentially deploy it across all our colonies. Imagine having this level of protection for every human settlement." "They do not understand." The seer communicated silently. "The effect cannot be replicated through force or technology. It emerges only from genuine compassion, and compassion cannot be manufactured." Marcus stood up, ignoring the alarmed looks from the security personnel. "You're missing the point. This isn't about weapons or strategic advantages. It's about something much simpler." "Which is?" Admiral Chen Okafor asked. "Doing the right thing because it's right, not because it's useful." Marcus walked to the containment field where the seer waited patiently. Every person in this room is trying to figure out how to use what happened. But what happened can't be used. It can only be lived. Colonel Morrison frowned. That's philosophical nonsense, Mr. Chen. War is about practical applications of force. If this creature can neutralize devourer aggression, we need to understand how and deploy it strategically. Marcus turned to face the room full of military and scientific minds. 3 weeks ago, you were losing the war. Your best estimates said humanity had maybe 5 years before the devourers overran all our colonies. Now they're retreating across the galaxy. And your response is to try to turn the solution into another weapon? The Admiral's expression hardened. Our response is to ensure human survival by any means necessary. That's our job. Show them, the seer urged. Let them see what their weapons cannot achieve. Marcus looked around the room at the assembled experts, all focused on quantifying and militarizing something that existed beyond their understanding. Then he made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone who knew him. He reached toward the containment field's control panel. Mr. Chen, step away from that device, Colonel Morrison barked, his hand moving toward his sidearm. Instead, Marcus deactivated the containment field. The seer stepped out calmly, showing no sign of wanting to escape or attack. It simply sat beside Marcus, looking up at the room full of humans with those unsettling golden eyes. Alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Security teams rushed into the briefing room, weapons drawn and targeting the small alien creature that had somehow caused the collapse of an interstellar empire. Stand down, Admiral Chen Okafor ordered. Nobody fires without my direct command. But the seer was already beginning to glow with that familiar aurora light. Its consciousness expanded to fill the room. And suddenly every person present could see what Marcus had seen weeks ago. The vast network of possible futures stretching out before humanity. They saw timelines where humanity survived by becoming more like the devourers, consuming other species to fuel their own expansion. They saw futures where fear and pragmatism turned humans into the very monsters they fought against. But they also saw other possibilities, paths where human compassion became a force that transformed the galaxy itself. Dr. Yamamoto lowered his tablet, tears streaming down his face as he witnessed civilizations learning to cooperate instead of compete. Colonel Morrison's hand fell away from his weapon as he saw the end of war itself, achieved not through superior firepower but through the simple recognition that all sentient beings shared common hopes and fears. Admiral Chen Okafor sat heavily in her chair, overwhelmed by visions of a navy that protected rather than conquered, that explored rather than dominated. How is this possible? She whispered. This is what humans can become, the seer projected to all of them, not through technology or tactics, but through the choice to see others as worthy of the same care you show your own kind. Your species stands at a crossroads. You can weaponize compassion and destroy it in the process, or you can embody it and change the fundamental nature of existence. The visions faded, leaving the room in stunned silence. Marcus looked around at the military leaders and scientists, seeing confusion and wonder replacing their earlier calculating focus. The devourers are withdrawing because they've encountered something they can't understand or defeat, Marcus said quietly. A species that chooses hope over fear, sacrifice over survival, unity over dominance. But only if we actually make those choices. The moment we try to turn it into a weapon, we become just another empire built on force. Admiral Chen Okafor was quiet for a long moment, staring at the small creature that had just shown her the future of the galaxy. Finally, she spoke. What do you recommend, Mr. Chen? Marcus knelt beside the seer, gently scratching behind its ears the way he had when it was dying in his field. I recommend you let us go home. The seer doesn't belong in a laboratory or a military installation. It belongs wherever it can help others understand what we're capable of when we choose to care. And if the devourers return, if they adapt to whatever this creature did to them, Marcus smiled, feeling the seer's contented purr vibrating through his fingers. Then we'll face them the same way we faced them before. Not with bigger guns or better shields, but by being the kind of people worth fighting for. The pattern spreads, the seer confirmed. Every act of genuine compassion creates ripples that reach across space and time. The devourers cannot adapt to something that exists in the fundamental structure of reality itself. Admiral Chen Okafor stood slowly, her entire worldview shifting around the implications of what she had experienced. The transport will take you back to New Eden whenever you're ready to leave, she said finally. But Mr. Chen? The galaxy is watching now. What happens next on your little farm may determine the future of every civilized world. Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility, but not feeling crushed by it. Then I guess I'd better get back to work. Fields don't plant themselves, and there's always someone who might need help. 6 months after the Battle of New Eden, Marcus's farm had become the most unlikely diplomatic center in human space. Representatives from a dozen species arrived weekly, seeking to understand what had caused the Devourer Empire's sudden collapse. The seer, now a permanent resident of the farmhouse, served as translator and guide for beings whose existence had been unknown to humanity just months before. Marcus found himself hosting creatures he'd never imagined. The crystalline architects who communicated through harmonic resonance had built him a new barn that seemed to grow from the ground itself. The gaseous collective had enhanced his irrigation system with technology that required no moving parts. Even the enigmatic silence, beings who existed partially outside normal spacetime, had sent what might have been an ambassador, though it was impossible to tell since they appeared as nothing more than a vague distortion in the air. I never thought I'd say this, Marcus told the seer as they watched a delegation of insectoid builders constructing what appeared to be a monument in his south field. But I miss the quiet. The quiet will return, the seer assured him. Its form now stabilized somewhere between its original cat-like appearance and its transformed state. But first, the galaxy must understand what happened here. Many species lived in terror of the Devourers for millennia. They need to see that such terror is no longer necessary. A soft chime from Marcus's communication array announced another incoming visitor. The display showed a ship of unknown configuration requesting permission to land. According to the registry, it belonged to something called the Devourer Remnant Fleet. Marcus felt his blood chill. Are they coming back to finish what they started? The seer's golden eyes grew distant as it peered into possible futures. No, they come seeking something else entirely, something they have never sought before. An hour later, Marcus stood at the edge of his landing field, watching a ship that seemed to absorb light itself settling gently onto his property. The hull was recognizably Devourer in design, but somehow different. Where their warships had been angular and predatory, this vessel curved like a flower opening to the sun. The airlock opened and 3 figures emerged. Marcus recognized them immediately as Devourers, but like their ship, they had changed. Their chitinous armor had taken on an iridescent quality similar to the seer's fur, and their movements lacked the mechanical precision he remembered from the invasion. The lead figure approached slowly. Its forearms spread in what Marcus hoped was a peaceful gesture. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that seemed designed to sound non-threatening. "Farmer Marcus Chen," it said, the words clearly difficult in its alien mouth. "I am consumed by hunger no more. Formerly designated Unit Commander 7742 of the 11th Harvest Fleet. I come to speak with the seer who shows truth." Marcus glanced at the seer, who had emerged from the farmhouse and was approaching the visitors with calm curiosity. "You want to talk?" "We want to understand," the Devourer leader said. "Since the pattern shift on this world, our kind has been changing. We no longer hunger for the life force of others. Food tastes like ash. The collective consciousness that guided us for millions of years has become a cacophony of confusion. They are evolving," the seer explained privately to Marcus. "The quantum resonance created here has begun altering their fundamental nature. They are becoming something new." The second Devourer, smaller and with more delicate features, stepped forward. "Many of our kind have chosen to enter the deep sleep rather than face this transformation. But some of us believe this change is not a curse but a gift. We wish to learn how to accept it." Marcus found himself in the surreal position of playing host to representatives of the species that had tried to exterminate humanity. "I'm not sure what I can tell you. I'm just a farmer. You are the one who began the pattern shift," the third Devourer said. "Your actions toward the seer created the resonance that changed everything. We have studied the quantum recordings from our ships. In the moment you chose compassion over caution, you altered the basic structure of causality itself." The seer moved closer to the Devourer delegation, its aurora patterns shifting into complex configurations Marcus had never seen before. When it spoke, its words were projected to all present. "You seek to understand hunger that has become fulfillment, conquest that has become cooperation, fear that has become hope. This transformation cannot be learned through study or analysis. It can only be experienced through practice. Practice. Consumed by hunger no more asked. The practice of caring for others without expectation of reward. The practice of sacrificing personal advantage for communal benefit. The practice of choosing hope when despair seems logical. Marcus watched the exchange with growing amazement. The Devourers, beings that had terrorized the galaxy for eons, were asking for lessons in compassion from a creature they had once hunted to extinction. How does one begin such practice? The smaller Devourer asked. Marcus found himself speaking before he'd consciously decided to answer. You start small. You see something that needs help and you help it. You find someone in pain and you try to ease that pain. You do it because it's right, not because it benefits you. But our nature, consumed by hunger no more, began. Can change, Marcus interrupted. 6 months ago, the seer was dying in my field. Its nature was to see terrible futures. My nature was to mind my own business and avoid complications. But we both chose to be something different than our nature demanded. The seer's glow intensified, and suddenly the Devourer delegation was experiencing shared visions. Marcus caught glimpses of what they were seeing. Possible futures where former enemies worked together to heal the damage done by millennia of conquest. Where Devourer technology, originally designed for destruction, was repurposed for creation and restoration. The visions showed Devourer fleets arriving at worlds they had once ravaged, not to consume, but to rebuild. Former slave species working alongside their former masters to create something better than either could achieve alone. The galaxy itself transforming from a battlefield into a garden. When the visions ended, all 3 Devourers were on their knees, their alien features somehow conveying profound emotion. We see now why you could not be defeated. Consumed by hunger no more said. You fight not just for survival, but for the possibility of something greater than survival. Will you teach us? The smaller Devourer asked. Will you show us how to practice this? Compassion? Marcus looked around his farm, now crowded with representatives from across the galaxy, all seeking to understand the simple act of kindness that had changed everything. He thought about the quiet life he'd once cherished, the simple routine of planting and harvesting that had been his world. Then he looked at the seer, whose golden eyes held depths of possibility he was only beginning to comprehend. I'll teach you what I can, he said finally. But the real learning happens when you go back to your own people and start practicing. Find someone who needs help and help them. Find someone who's hungry and feed them. Find someone who's afraid and protect them. This is how empires truly fall, the seer observed privately. Not through conquest, but through transformation. Not through force, but through the choice to become something better. As the sun set over New Eden, Marcus watched former enemies beginning the long journey toward becoming friends. It wasn't the quiet life he'd planned, but perhaps, he thought, it was the life the galaxy needed him to live. The pattern was spreading, just as the seer had promised. One act of kindness at a time, one choice of hope over fear, one decision to care about strangers who might become family. The revolution of the heart had begun. 6 months after the Battle of New Eden, Marcus's farm had become the most unlikely diplomatic center in human space. Representatives from a dozen species arrived weekly, seeking to understand what had caused the Devourer Empire's sudden collapse. The seer, now a permanent resident of the farmhouse, served as translator and guide for beings whose existence had been unknown to humanity just months before. Marcus found himself hosting creatures he'd never imagined. The crystalline architects who communicated through harmonic resonance had built him a new barn that seemed to grow from the ground itself. The gaseous collective had enhanced his irrigation system with technology that required no moving parts. Even the enigmatic silence, beings who existed partially outside normal spacetime, had sent what might have been an ambassador, though it was impossible to tell since they appeared as nothing more than a vague distortion in the air. I never thought I'd say this, Marcus told the seer as they watched a delegation of insectoid builders constructing what appeared to be a monument in his south field. But I miss the quiet. The quiet will return, the seer assured him. Its form now stabilized somewhere between its original cat-like appearance and its transformed state. But first, the galaxy must understand what happened here. Many species lived in terror of the Devourers for millennia. They need to see that such terror is no longer necessary. A soft chime from Marcus's communication array announced another incoming visitor. The display showed a ship of unknown configuration requesting permission to land. According to the registry, it belonged to something called the Devourer Remnant Fleet. Marcus felt his blood chill. Are they coming back to finish what they started? The seer's golden eyes grew distant as it peered into possible futures. No, they come seeking something else entirely, something they have never sought before. An hour later, Marcus stood at the edge of his landing field, watching a ship that seemed to absorb light itself settling gently onto his property. The hull was recognizably Devourer in design, but somehow different. Where their warships had been angular and predatory, this vessel curved like a flower opening to the sun. The airlock opened and 3 figures emerged. Marcus recognized them immediately as Devourers, but like their ship, they had changed. Their chitinous armor had taken on an iridescent quality similar to the seer's fur, and their movements lacked the mechanical precision he remembered from the invasion. The lead figure approached slowly. Its forearms spread in what Marcus hoped was a peaceful gesture. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that seemed designed to sound non-threatening. Farmer Marcus Chen, it said, the words clearly difficult in its alien mouth. I am consumed by hunger no more. Formerly designated Unit Commander 7742 of the 11th Harvest Fleet. I come to speak with the seer who shows truth. Marcus glanced at the seer, who had emerged from the farmhouse and was approaching the visitors with calm curiosity. You want to talk? We want to understand, the Devourer leader said. Since the pattern shift on this world, our kind has been changing. We no longer hunger for the life force of others. Food tastes like ash. The collective consciousness that guided us for millions of years has become a cacophony of confusion. They are evolving, the seer explained privately to Marcus. The quantum resonance created here has begun altering their fundamental nature. They are becoming something new. The second Devourer, smaller and with more delicate features, stepped forward. Many of our kind have chosen to enter the deep sleep rather than face this transformation. But some of us believe this change is not a curse but a gift. We wish to learn how to accept it. Marcus found himself in the surreal position of playing host to representatives of the species that had tried to exterminate humanity. I'm not sure what I can tell you. I'm just a farmer. You are the one who began the pattern shift, the third Devourer said. Your actions toward the seer created the resonance that changed everything. We have studied the quantum recordings from our ships. In the moment you chose compassion over caution, you altered the basic structure of causality itself. The seer moved closer to the Devourer delegation, its aurora patterns shifting into complex configurations Marcus had never seen before. When it spoke, its words were projected to all present. You seek to understand hunger that has become fulfillment, conquest that has become cooperation, fear that has become hope. This transformation cannot be learned through study or analysis. It can only be experienced through practice. Consumed by hunger no more asked. The practice of caring for others without expectation of reward. The practice of sacrificing personal advantage for communal benefit. The practice of choosing hope when despair seems logical. Marcus watched the exchange with growing amazement. The Devourers, beings that had terrorized the galaxy for eons, were asking for lessons in compassion from a creature they had once hunted to extinction. How does one begin such practice? The smaller Devourer asked. Marcus found himself speaking before he'd consciously decided to answer. You start small. You see something that needs help and you help it. You find someone in pain and you try to ease that pain. You do it because it's right, not because it benefits you. But our nature, consumed by hunger no more, began. Can change, Marcus interrupted. 6 months ago, the seer was dying in my field. Its nature was to see terrible futures. My nature was to mind my own business and avoid complications. But we both chose to be something different than our nature demanded. The seer's glow intensified, and suddenly the Devourer delegation was experiencing shared visions. Marcus caught glimpses of what they were seeing, possible futures where former enemies worked together to heal the damage done by millennia of conquest. Where Devourer technology, originally designed for destruction, was repurposed for creation and restoration. The visions showed Devourer fleets arriving at worlds they had once ravaged, not to consume, but to rebuild. Former slave species working alongside their former masters to create something better than either could achieve alone. The galaxy itself transforming from a battlefield into a garden. When the visions ended, all 3 Devourers were on their knees, their alien features somehow conveying profound emotion. We see now why you could not be defeated. Consumed by hunger no more said, you fight not just for survival, but for the possibility of something greater than survival. Will you teach us? The smaller devourer asked. Will you show us how to practice this? Compassion? Marcus looked around his farm, now crowded with representatives from across the galaxy, all seeking to understand the simple act of kindness that had changed everything. He thought about the quiet life he'd once cherished, the simple routine of planting and harvesting that had been his world. Then he looked at the seer, whose golden eyes held depths of possibility he was only beginning to comprehend. I'll teach you what I can, he said finally. But the real learning happens when you go back to your own people and start practicing. Find someone who needs help and help them. Find someone who's hungry and feed them. Find someone who's afraid and protect them. This is how empires truly fall, the seer observed privately. Not through conquest, but through transformation. Not through force, but through the choice to become something better. As the sun set over New Eden, Marcus watched former enemies beginning the long journey toward becoming friends. It wasn't the quiet life he'd planned, but perhaps, he thought, it was the life the galaxy needed him to live. The pattern was spreading, just as the seer had promised. One act of kindness at a time, one choice of hope over fear, one decision to care about strangers who might become family. The revolution of the heart had begun.